Hi everybody, my name is Sarah Lean and I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft. In this session today, I want to cover off how you can start your data center transformation journey using Azure Migrate. So let's dive in. So I've been talking to customers for about 2 years now on how they actually migrate away from their on-prem data centers or migrate some of their workloads from their on-prem data centers into Azure. Now, each of those customers have different circumstances and reasons for this transformation journey that they're about to embark on. I've had customers who have had to move out of their data center because they've had a railway line coming through that data center. That date is hard and set and they have to move out. There's no stopping it and there's no changing that decision due to circumstances around it. I've also had customers talk to me about moving to the cloud because they want to increase capacity within their data center, or even they want to deal with the issue of their hardware and their software being old. You know, it's come to that end of the cycle. It's 4 or 5 years old and they're at that point in time where they either renew it and reinvest all that capital into that again, or they start to look at other alternatives. However, regardless of what driver is driving people to move from on-prem into Azure, there are really 4 stages that I encourage all my customers to kind of walk through. Those 4 stages are discovery and assessment, migrate, optimize, and secure and manage. Now, the first 2 stages are kind of one-off stages. You'll probably do them once within your team and then you'll not think about them again, hopefully if everything goes to plan. However, the last 2 are stages that you want to start integrating into your business as usual processes and thinking about how you can adopt these new processes now that your workloads are in Azure. So let's have a look at these stages and have a look at them in more depth. So during your discovery and assessment phase, you should really be focusing on trying to understand what your estate has. Now, we all probably are guilty of not fully understanding what we have in our data center. Often I've had customers do this assessment to understand what servers they have, and they've always uncovered a server that they thought was decommissioned or they didn't even know about because it was snuck in as a side project or a temporary project. So you really want to make sure that you understand all your servers and you're aware of all the servers that are in your environment. You also want to understand how these servers are all connected. These servers don't act independently within your environment. They are all interconnected somehow. They all have a friendship, as I like to say, with each other. You will have SQL databases that help run your front web ends even. And it's all about trying to figure out where those connections are and how you need to think about those servers as connected pairs or even more when you're migrating them, because some applications won't successfully run within your environment if they are split up. So if you leave a server on-prem and then move one into the cloud, the latency might kill that application and really interrupt your end users' experience. So you need to understand how the servers are all connected. You also should be concentrating on finding owners for your workloads. And often IT get landed with looking after all of these servers, whereas the decisions about their lifespan or replacements are often made outside of the IT department and not communicated fully. So find an owner within your business and understand what that workload looks like and what their plans for that workload are. So for example, if you have an HR system in your environment, find someone within your HR department who's willing to be a stakeholder and can communicate what the lifespan of that application is. And some of the critical paths, do they have a change freeze? Can they not have that application down or have any downtime during the application for a certain period of time? You know, are they going through a recruitment drive and really need that application to be rock solid and available for them during the month of April, say, for instance? And that affects your migration plans and your strategy as well. So speak to your business and include them as part of this process. Another thing that you need to really discover is your training needs. You need to understand what levels your staff are at in order to be able to support the functionality on your workloads going forward. You're ultimately moving your workloads from an environment where everybody is familiar with and understands and probably comfortable with to an environment that maybe not everyone is familiar with or comfortable with. So identifying what training needs to take place to upskill your staff to be able to run your business in a BAU model after the fact that they've been moved. If this takes an additional 6 months and you need to stop your migration plan and do 6 months of training so that all your staff are up to date, then so be it. I've seen so many migrations fail because they bring in a third-party company or they try to attempt it themselves without actually upskilling their staff, and things go wrong because people don't know what the platform is and what Azure actually means. So identify training needs and make that a priority as well. Azure Migrate is probably one of my favourite products. It's been in our product catalogue for quite a while now. Back in September 2017, Azure Migrate was announced at Microsoft Ignite, and it had a couple of capabilities back then, but basically it has grown into the product that we all know now. And we refer to Azure Migrate as the hub for data center migrations. And we call it the hub because it covers all our key migration scenarios. It has that integrated discovery, assessment and migration capabilities, capable of using our first-party tools as well as integrating with third-party tools, so you don't have to go off to another platform or remember another URL. You can access these third-party tools from the Azure Portal. And it really is that one-stop shop, or that single pane of glass, if you want to call it that, stop for you if you are doing a migration. And when we talk about key scenarios, we're talking about migrating things like your Windows and Linux machines. So whether that be a VMware machine, a Hyper-V, a physical, or something that lives on another cloud, we can look at assessing them and migrating them up into Azure with Azure Migrate. We can also look at SQL and other databases and figure out the best strategy moving forward for that. Your raw data, we can understand how that can be migrated, because let's face it, we've all got storage somewhere in our data center that we never access, but the business won't allow us to delete, right? So we want to make sure we're migrating that and mitigating any issues when we migrate away from that data center. And lastly, the new capabilities that were released in November 2019 is virtual desktops and web apps. So again, you can assess and migrate those using the Azure Migrate tool and the portal. So the Azure Migrate Discovery will give you that basic inventory of your workloads and your servers within your environment. But like I said, what we want to cover off as well is understanding how those servers are connected. And within Azure Migrate, we reference that as dependency mapping. And we can do that in two ways. We can use an agent and install it on all of our servers to collect that information for us. Or we can use an agentless capability. Now, the agentless capability again was announced in November 2019 and is currently in preview mode. So in order to be able to access the agentless mode, you need to go to the link on the screen, aka.ms/app mapping, and register your subscription. The team behind that will then enable the features within your Azure subscription and you can utilise it. But ultimately, both options will help you understand how your servers are connected and help you build those connection lines. Now, with the power of log analytics, where the data is stored from your dependency mapping, either agent or agentless methodologies, you'll get a diagram like this. You'll get an interactive diagram like this, where you can see the servers that you're assessing and understand the connection lines. In this example, we can see these two servers on the left-hand side are actually connected into the SQL Server installation on the third server as well. So there's something happening with those two servers and it's querying the database. So we need to be mindful of that and we need to understand that when we're actually looking to migrate away from our on-prem infrastructure. Ideally, we'd love to keep these three servers together. We can also see the other connections. We can see the outbound connections. We can see the ports that these servers are using and connecting with and potentially sending information to. And again, we can also see how other things within our environment are connecting into them. We can see potentially if our IT department are remoting in to these boxes, if they're using SQL Studio management services to interact with the box, those different connections, so that we can start to build up a picture of how not only do these servers interact with themselves, but how do the IT department interact with them as well. Now that we've collected all the data, we have an inventory of our servers and we have the dependency mapping information. We want to do that assessment. We want to understand how we can figure out which workloads are suitable to move on to Azure. And at a very basic level, that could be just understanding what operating systems are supported and what operating systems are not supported on Azure. But there are other things to take into consideration as well when you're looking at suitability for moving workloads. Secondly, we want to understand sizing. So the Azure Migrate tool can collect information around the performance of our servers. We can see the peaks and spikes of, say, CPU or memory usage, and then understand what size within Azure, what t-shirt size within Azure is the most appropriate. When I used to manage workloads on-prem, I was often guilty of oversizing some of our workloads so that I wouldn't hit any performance issues and I wouldn't get those phone calls to the help desk saying that things were running slow. So if you are like me and you run your on-prem environment just a little bit over the recommended specifications for some of your servers, Azure Migrate can help you try and resize it accordingly on-prem and bring you back into line with some of those system requirements. And this is an important stage because you pay for the size of virtual machine you run within Azure. So there's no point running a virtual machine that's bigger than it needs to be for your workload. So that's also a suitable thing to think about within assessment. And lastly, we want to drill into those costs. How much is the storage? How much is the compute going to cost us if we're to actually move our workloads into Azure? So during the assessment stage, your objectives are determining what the future of your workloads are. So when I was saying, speaking to your business about what their plans for the workloads are they changing strategy and potentially changing that HR application that you currently host into something different? And maybe there isn't any point migrating it to Azure right now because in a month or two's time, it's going to be replaced anyway. So there's things like that you need to understand. You also need to understand what can and can't be moved to Azure. So again, whether it's suitable in terms of, even as a base level, the operating system, or whether that workload actually makes sense living in Azure. And then lastly, understanding those costs and being able to justify those costs and explain them, potentially to your leadership team, etc. So now that you've done the discovery and you've got approval to actually move those workloads into Azure, we want to start to think about the migrate process. Now you'll often hear people talking about 5 hours, 7 hours, 9 hours. There's a whole host of different acronyms and marketing, to be honest, out there around this. I often talk about 6 hours, to be honest. I talk about rehost, refactor, re-architect, rebuild, replace, and remain. Those are the 6 things that you need to think about and how you actually go forward with your workloads. And to be honest, if rehosting is the most appropriate one for you, then that is absolutely fine. Lots of people are looking at rehosting. Lots of people are looking at refactoring or rebuilding or re-architecting. But it's entirely up to every organisation and every organisation's workload. If you are looking at keeping some things on-prem, some things in the cloud, and potentially even using a multi-cloud strategy, one thing to think about is how you manage all of that and how you keep all of that in line. I often see customers struggling when they have workloads on-prem, they have workloads in Azure, in the other clouds, and even they're starting to look at Azure Stack and some of the Azure Edge products as well. The management gets a bit loose. They start to lose a bit of control over consistency on how their virtual machines are set up, how the compliance is set up, access control, etc. And that's where to think about maybe Azure Arc. Now, Azure Arc is a product that Microsoft released in November 2019. And it's a topic in itself, to be honest, and I'm not going to cover off much of it in this session, but it's something to bear in mind. How are you going to manage all of these different workloads and the different locations that they're living in now if you go down that hybrid route? But the focus is understanding that there is no right answer or wrong answer. Regardless of which R you actually choose to migrate with, it'll be the right answer for your organisation. Please don't be swayed by peer pressure or something you hear at conferences or online. The workloads and your decisions are all going to be unique to you. I'm often asked nowadays which product we should be using to migrate to Azure with. And in the past at Microsoft, we used to recommend using Azure Site Recovery. And Now we've slightly changed that advice. We now say that Azure Migrate is the tool to use when you're actually migrating to the cloud. And that's because Azure Site Recovery was always designed to be our disaster recovery tool, our kind of DR tool. And we kind of utilise the capabilities of protecting your workloads to be able to move them into Azure quickly. But now we have Azure Migrate, which is a dedicated product for migrating your workloads. And that's the one you should really opt to use. Both products will do the migration for you, but really the recommended advice and a lot of our documentation now says Azure Migrate is the product you should be using. And that's because Azure Migrate allows us to migrate our VMware, Hyper-V, physical, or workloads that live in other clouds. We can test before we migrate, so we can do a non-impacting production testing environment, so you understand all the steps you need to go through. We have agentless capabilities for some of those workloads, and we look at trying to minimise the data loss and downtime that you have when you're migrating. Something you should also consider around is migrating that data. As I said earlier on, we probably all work in environments where we have lots of data somewhere in an environment that is legacy, no one accesses, but everyone's keen to keep. And trying to move that data potentially over your internet pipe with all your live production data is going to cause a bit of issue, right? If you do that calculation about how much data you have and the speed of your internet connect line, you might be looking at days or months or even years worth of upload time. And this is where Databox can actually help you. Databox is at its very basic level storage that is sent to you. You copy your data on and then it's sent back to Azure and uploaded for you. Now there's a couple of varieties that you have available to you if you want to use Databox. You have Databox Disk, which looks a bit like a hard disk and has the capability of up to about 40 terabytes if you use that. You have Databox itself, which looks like a tower PC, the typical type of PC you maybe have at home, and it has up to potentially 100 terabytes of space. And then you have Databox Heavy, which comes with its own wheels and its own trolley handle and has a larger capability of 1 petabyte. And as I said, the way that Databox works is you place an order, we ship that to you, and you copy your data onto that, and then it's shipped back to Azure and your data is moved that way. And that's great for some types of workloads. It's not great for all workloads, but it's something to consider as well when you're moving bulk data up into Azure. During the migrate stage, the only objective you should really be focusing on is moving your workloads and moving them successfully. However, don't forget to update documentation and update procedures. You don't want something bad to happen, so if you have an outage and your help desk or someone within the IT department runs to have a look at the documentation, it says that the server lives on-prem and they go and fire that server up in your data centre and you've suddenly got an old server spinning up with old data on it and your end users are complaining and then they start to use it and you become a bit of a mess, right? So make sure you update your documentation and update all the procedures that people need to now go through. So I've talked a lot about Azure Migrate and the processes, so now I want to show you a demo. I want to show you that end-to-end process of discovering your servers in your environment and then migrating them up into Azure with Azure Migrate. Now this process does take several days and potentially could take weeks within your environment. So I have recorded the end-to-end process so that we can cover it off in a short period of time and show you that. And I've sped up some of the places that are just progress bars loading as well. So let's dive into that demo and see what that end-to-end process with Azure Migrate looks like. So at Microsoft, we love doing demos around that fictional company, Tailwind Traders, that you've probably heard a lot about. Now, Tailwind Traders have a bunch of servers on their on-prem environment that they want to move to Azure, and they're performing a test and they are deciding to do the test on a non-critical application within their environment. And that way they can learn from it, and if something actually does go wrong with it, they aren't going to get shouted at by their leadership team because they've brought down a production environment. So let's have a wee look at the application that they're actually going to be migrating. So they've decided to migrate this very simple workload within their IT department, and that's this kind of fitness application that they have and they use to track their exercise or lack of exercise. And that's a front web end. It's made up of three servers that make that up. One of the servers is a SQL database. Now, Tailwind traders have taken the decision to actually migrate all of this workload as virtual machines. So they're basically doing a lift and shift from on-prem into Azure. So if we dive into the Azure Portal, we can actually see how we start this Azure Migrate project. So we search up in Azure for Azure Migrate, and it pulls up the item for us. Now, when we create this, we are given this kind of screen that shows you all the different capabilities, the key scenarios that Azure Migrate can work through with you. We're going to concentrate on servers, like I said, as we're doing a lift and shift. So we are asked, first of all, to give our project a name and provide it some information around what resource group we're actually going to be storing this Azure Migrate project in. The next thing is to understand which assessment tool we're going to utilise, and we can see that we have the first party one, the Microsoft one, at the top of the list, and then we have the third party tools listed below. Each tool has different capabilities and different price points, so it's key to understand which one is suitable for your business. We're going to use the first party Microsoft one, and then again we have the same process for the migration tooling, picking the first party one or a third party one. Again, we're going for the first party one. So now that our Azure Migrate project is spun up, we are asked about the environment that we're about to discover. Now, we're talking about virtual machines here, so we're asked whether we have a Hyper-V environment or a VMware environment. When you assess a physical environment, it's a slightly different process, and I can cover that off in another video at the moment, but right now we're going to be concentrating on virtual machines. So we sell it that we have a Hyper-V environment, and the information in the screen below slightly changes. So we're given access to download this VHD file, and it's 12 gig in size, so it's a fairly chunky file. But ultimately what it is a complete package for you. So that VHD file has the operating system installed and the Azure Migrate appliance tooling pre-installed as well. So all you have to do is download that file, import it into your Hyper-V platform, and then spin it up, and ultimately what you'll get is that completed workload. It'll just put you right into the operating system and you can start to configure it there. So here we are on our server, our VHD server that we've converted. Now we're asked a few questions at the start. We're asked to read through the licensing terms, make sure you do that. And we're also doing some basic connectivity, some internet connectivity, and checking that Azure Migrate is on the latest version. We're then asked to register our Azure Migrate appliance, and that is basically us logging into our Azure Portal and making that connection between our now on-prem box and our Azure subscription. So we pick on the details of our Azure Migrate project that we created earlier and work through the process. Now the next stage is putting in your credentials so that your Azure Migrate appliance can actually discover your environment and discover the servers that you want it to discover. The next stage is to add in the Hyper-V hosts or clusters that you actually want to assess in this case. We are just concentrating on one Hyper-V host, so we put that name in and the tooling discovers it. Now it can take 10 minutes or an hour or even 24 hours for the discovery tool to actually feed the information back into the Azure portal. So it's definitely something to set and then maybe check later on. Don't assume something's gone wrong because you don't see the information being collected within 10 minutes of doing that collection. So we're now back in the Azure portal and we can see that our tooling has discovered 4 servers for us. And we expected that. The 3 servers for our health application, and it's also discovered that Azure Migrate appliance. What you'll see in that last screen was inventory information about what's happening within your environment, and you can also see that it said that we didn't have any dependency information. If we click through into that, what we're given is the opportunity to create a log analytics or OMS workspace to store the information in the dependency mapping data into, and then the option to download the agents. Now, as I said, there is an agentless capability, but as it's in preview at the moment, I'm showing you the generally available option, which is the migrate with agents. Now, you have to download 2 agents, the Microsoft Monitoring Agent, and for those of you that are familiar with that, that is actually the SCOM agent. And the second one is the dependency agent. They both do slightly different things. So the dependency agent looks at your TCP or UDP connections and starts to build up those connections for you. And the monitoring agent actually pulls in some information about performance and software installed and general information like that. Now, I'm not going to show you how to install these agents onto your box, as they are both fairly simple processes. It's a download and a next install. You can also script it if you have a large environment. But ultimately, once you do that install and put those agents onto your box, you'll get the information back. And when you go back into the Azure Portal, it will be able to refresh and we'll see that we are now being able to view the dependencies. Now, we haven't installed the dependency agents on the Azure Migrate appliance, as we're not migrating that up into the cloud. So we can ignore that server now. It's kind of done its usefulness for us. So now that we've got that basic information and dependency mapping around our servers, we want to actually do that assessment that will give us information about suitability and the pricing. So we have a bunch of information that we have to input into this survey for us. We're talking about things like target location, so which Azure data center do you actually want to migrate your workloads into? Storage type, do you want standard, premium? Do you want to use reserved instances? Are you planning to have these workloads fixed in place for a year or 3 years? And for those that aren't aware of reserved instances, they're a way of actually predicting your cost and setting out your costs and saving some money by preempting and saying, this workload is going to be here for the next year or 3 years, and getting a reduced cost on that. So pick the relevant data center for you, pick the storage type. I always say automatic and allow the tooling to actually pick the right one for your workload based on the information that it's connected. The next section is around virtual machine size, and as I mentioned earlier, sometimes we oversize on-prem, right? So we can utilise Azure Migrate and the performance data that is collected to actually give us a more realistic size for our virtual machine if we host it in Azure. Now, I always say to run the Azure Migrate discovery tool for at least 30 days or 31 days, depending on the month that you're running it in, and allow it to collect the data so that it sees that those spikes, if there's an application that only ever gets used one day of the month, and it gets a general overview of your environment. I usually say to customers to do a performance-based costing assessment and also do a like-for-like cost-based assessment. And that gives you some idea of the cost savings you could use if you were to put some things like size recommendations in place. To be honest, in reality, somewhere in between those two reports is where you're actually going to end up with your costing once you move to Azure. So input the information that you're comfortable with for your sizing and proceed to the next stage. We have the ability to select the virtual machine sizes. I always again select all of them and allow the tooling to pick the one that we want. The last section is around pricing. Which Azure subscription do you have? Which currency do you want to report in? Do you want to start playing around with virtual machine uptime and maybe looking at shutting down some of your virtual machines or running them 24/7? There's different ways you can play around with this tool, and I said, you can create as many assessments as you want in order to understand the cost implications of some of these features. And the last question is Azure Hybrid Benefit, and that's the ability to take your Windows Server license, if eligible, from on-prem and actually utilise it in the cloud. We tell the tool which servers we actually want to assess. So in this case, we've only discovered a few servers, so we're going to apply the assessment data to those 3 servers. But if you assess a bunch of servers and you want to have different assessment data or criteria assigned to different ones, you can do that. Now, it can take a few seconds to do the discovery report and give you that output, or it could take several hours depending on the amount of servers you're actually assessing. In this case, we're only doing 3, so it's quite quick to get that data back. So if we drill into that report, we get this visual diagram back. We can see what's suitable for Azure, what's not suitable for Azure, and we can get that monthly cost down estimate. Now you can export this and you can drill into it, so you can download it as an Excel spreadsheet and then have a look at manipulating the data to put it into, I don't know, a Power BI report, or putting it into a Word document, depending on how you want to display that to your senior leadership team and the people that need to know these cost informations. So now that we've done that discovery, we've done that assessment, and we've got approval from our leadership team to do the migration, we want to do the migration. So we are asked to discover a bit about our environment again. So we put in that we have a Hyper-V server and a Hyper-V environment that we're looking to migrate. And we pick the target region that we want to actually move our virtual machines into. Now, it takes a wee while for the tool just to set up, so we've sped up that process so that you don't have to sit through that. Now that we're told that we have that Hyper-V environment, we're given the option to download a bit of software that we have to install on our Hyper-V server. Your VMware environments and your physical server environments will have a slightly different process, but ultimately with Hyper-V we need to take this bit of software and make that connection between our Hyper-V server on-prem and Azure. The installation of this bit of software is very straightforward. It is kind of a next input. You do have to put in this little file that you've downloaded from Azure Portal and put it in, but that's just to create that connection between on-prem and your Azure subscription, so that you can start to replicate the virtual machines from on-prem into Azure. Once you've installed the software on-prem, you do have to click that finalise registration, and that's just confirming the registration and setting up all the different pieces that you can take. Now that we've done that registration, we can actually start to set up the replication and replicate our virtual machines for Tailwind traders. So the migration tooling has discovered those 4 servers that we were expecting, and like I said, we want to start that replication process. We want to actually start the process of migrating them from on-prem up into the cloud. So we've got the 4 servers that we expected, and if we click on the replicate button, we can actually start that process. So again, we confirm the environment that we're migrating, so Hyper-V. We say that yes, we're actually going to use the sizing and the migration settings that Azure Migrate assessment that we did earlier tells us to and is best for our environment, but you don't have to do that if you don't want. We pick that group that we created and we pick that assessment that we created as well. And we make sure that all 3 virtual machines for this workload are actually coming with us, and we migrate them. Now here in the target settings, we start to talk about which subscription, which resource group, which replication storage account, virtual network and subnet we want to migrate these virtual machines into. Now it's key to make sure that you set up this before, so have your virtual network and your subnet set up before you start the replication process. And again, we have that option around applying hybrid use benefit. Now on this screen, we are shown the size of the virtual machine that Azure will provision for us, and we need to confirm the operating system type as well. You can here change the size of the virtual machine, change if you want to apply availability sets, change the operating system disk. There's a bunch of settings that you can change here. You can also change the amount of disks that you want to replicate. So you may have attached tons of disks over the course of your organisation's time on-prem to one server, but you don't want to migrate all of those disks for whatever reason. And you can do that here. You can say all of them or just pick the ones that you want. Now the replication will start, and this is where it takes a bit of time. So it took probably about a day for us to replicate these Azure virtual machines up into Azure, just because of Tailwind Trader's internet pipe, the size of the virtual machines, and the rate of change that was happening. So this is definitely a stage where patience is a virtue for you. But now that we have those virtual machines within Azure, we can see that the replication is healthy and they are protected, and we are capable of actually migrating them up into Azure now. So now that the boxes are migrated, we want to actually test the process. We want to do that test migration and make sure that we understand the process, have all the right steps written down in our change request report, and are comfortable with the process. And this is key because sometimes these migrations will happen at 2 a.m. in the morning, and the last thing you want to do is stumble across a box that you weren't sure of, or a step that you aren't sure of, and panic kind of sets in. We've all been there. So we go through the servers and we say that we want to do the test migration for these servers, and what happens is Azure will spin up a copy of that server within the subnet that we said, and it'll be a usable virtual machine. It will have the data and the operating system and the name, etc. that we were expecting. Although when you see these servers, when we show them in the Azure portal, you'll see that they actually are appended with a -test. And that shows that there's no conflict on our network if we had the virtual machines running already. But basically you can log into these virtual machines, you can test the processes, test your servers, see if there's any software you need to uninstall or reinstall. There's a whole host of things that you can do in order to test these servers and make sure that, as I said, you are capable of migrating them and you understand all the steps that you have to work through to make the migration successful. So now that we've actually done that test migration, we're happy with the process, we've documented all the steps, we know what we're doing, we are happy with the process. We want to tidy this up. We don't want to leave these test servers, these test migration servers running in the background. Ultimately, you pay for the compute and the storage that is running and started within Azure. So clean these up once you're finished. Go through the process and make sure you clean up these virtual machines so that you're not charging extra to your bill every month because you've not done the cleanup exercise. So now that we've done that test migration and we've cleaned up all of our test migration servers, we want to actually perform the migration. We are happy with the process and we've got all the okay from the change board, and we can migrate them. Now, one of the questions you're asked here within the migrate process is whether you want to shut down the machines before the migration to watch the data loss and minimise that, or not shut them down. And this is entirely up to yourselves, and this will depend on whether you can have downtime from the business and whether your application can actually recover from this process. And that again is entirely up to you and your environment and what's happening within the workload that you've got. We're not going to shut down these machines because they're not mission critical. There's not a lot of changings happening on-prem between when we flick that switch. So we're just going to say no. And the migration happens. And much like the test process, what's happening is Azure is spinning up that virtual machine with all of our data and bringing it into a live environment for us. So if we go back into a resource group, what we can actually see is those servers. Those servers are spun up. They are no longer have that -test reference to them. They are now our production workloads. We have now migrated them. Now, obviously, because we said no to shutting down our on-prem workloads before the migration, we now need to go and shut down those on-prem so that everybody starts to utilise the one that's living in Azure. And again, if we've done this successfully, our end users shouldn't see any difference. So that's the end-to-end process of discovering your servers and migrating them into Azure. Now you can do them as separate stages. I did it as one big long stage and one big long demo, but what you can ultimately do is do your assessment, figure out what's happening within your environment, make sure you collect the data, plan with your senior leadership team and stakeholders, and then days or weeks or months later, you can then start that actual migration process. They're two separate tools and you don't have to run them in parallel. You can do them at different times. Now, the pricing of Azure Migrate is free for the most part. You will pay something for log analytics if you utilise some of the additional functionality that log analytics have. But if you're doing a Migrate project, the first 180 days are free for log analytics, and when you start that migration process as well, you get free server migration licenses for the first 180 days. You may pay for some storage around your replication of your virtual machines, but again, it should be minimum and it should keep cost to a very reasonable point for your organisation. So let's have a look at the rest of the steps. So we still have 2 steps left that we have to use within this migration process. So let's have a look at them. So now that our workloads are in Azure and we're running them there, we need to start thinking about how we are going to change some of the things that we do as a business as usual process. And one of those is around optimization. You should be monitoring your cloud spend. As I've said, you are charged in Azure based on billing meters, and those kind of crank up over minutes or hours, and you need to be accountable for what's running and make sure you're cleaning up things that are running within your environment. And Azure Cost Management can help you do that. It can help you understand spending anomalies, usage inefficiencies, and forecasting what your spend is going to be in the future. You also want to try and drive that organisation accountability. It shouldn't just be the IT department that's looking after what's happening within the environment. Create budgets, create alerts, notify people of when they're going over their spend or something's not happened. And you can help do that with stakeholder accountability as well. Azure Advisor can also help you understand whether your machines or your virtual machines are at the right size, whether they need to be bigger or smaller, what's idle, what could be cheaper to run if you took advantage of reserved instances or Azure Hybrid Use benefits as well. Your optimised objectives should really be making the most of the cloud, making the most of the features and the functionality you now have within the platform you're using to host your workloads. You should be as well adapting to a new way of working. Things are slightly different now from on-prem that you're in the cloud, so make sure you're constantly adapting to that and constantly training your staff on that and the changes. And adapt your solutions as you grow. You may have moved your workloads as a lift and shift workload, and that is absolutely fine. But as new technology and new functionality comes on board and you become more comfortable with this environment, start to look at how you can grow your solutions and maybe better implement them. And last but not least, we want to talk about secure and managing. A lot of people think that moving to the cloud means that they don't have to think about security anymore for their environments, but security in the cloud is a shared responsibility. Yes, no longer do you have to think about things like physical assets, so barbed wire fencing or secure parking gates or CCTV and stuff like that, because the physical foundations of your environment are now taken care of by Microsoft. But your responsibility is still around things like making sure ports are shut to the internet and there's security measures around that. Things like passwords are not really simple to crack, password 1 and your username's admin, and making sure the data is secure and closed off to the people that shouldn't be accessing it, even internally as well, not just for the external people. The Azure Security Centre can actually help you understand that, help you strengthen your security posture and protect against threats. If you've run an Office 365 or M365 environment, you'll be familiar with Secure Score and how you can utilise that to make your environment more secure. We have the same thing within Azure, and it can again help you address those security vulnerabilities and understand how you can improve your environment. Your secure and manage objectives, again, are just being aware of what your responsibility is. Where should you be focusing your time and your energy now? And again, adapting to this new environment and making sure you're keeping up to pace with it. Now I've covered off a whole host of things today, and if you want to dig in a bit deeper, we have something called the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework, and that is a base of a bunch of best practices that people like myself, Microsoft employees, Microsoft customers or Microsoft partners have come together and created. The document is rather large, but it is split up into different sections, and you can break that down so you can jump in depending on where your journey is and pick out the relevant information for your organisation. We also have the Azure Migration Centre, which again has a bunch of information around that migration journey, the tooling you can use, and some information about the partners you can actually engage with to help you with that migration journey if you didn't want to do it on your own. My team and I can be found all over the world. We are, I think, located within 6 or 7 different time zones at the moment, and we often blog on itopstalk.com, so please do check us out there and see what material that we're sharing, and we all are on social media again, so please do reach out to us. But thank you for your time, and I hope this was an informative presentation for you. My contact details are on screen, so if you have any questions or any follow-up, please do reach out to me and I'd be happy to help with that. But thank you.